Michael Lewis has made a career of chronicling the changing tides of the business world and their effect on the culture at large. After graduating from Princeton, Lewis worked for several years as a banker at Salomon Brothers. His first book, Liar's Poker, told the story of the high-flying Wall Street scene of the 1980s. His latest book, Next, The Future Just Happened, offers his take on the Internet revolution and reveals the face of the new power, elite teenagers. The book is also the subject of an upcoming special to air on A&E August 6th and 7th. I'm pleased to have Michael Lewis back on this program. Welcome back.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Good to be here.
First things first. Now, you've been living in Paris for a year and a half.
Living is putting it strongly.
You were not there
kind of based
much.
there. I was running around the world filming this television show and working on this book.
Now, was Tabitha working there or just taking care of these new kids in your life?
There's only one new kid.
One, okay.
Yeah, but she wasn't working there. So yeah, she was taking.
So
care
she had a chance really to enjoy Paris more. Than you did.
No, she had a much fonder experience. She feels much more fondly of the place than I do.
Because you were often not there, running around doing this.
I wasn't there very much.
Yeah.
I wasn't there very much. And it was true that there are people on the planet who I prefer to the Parisians. I didn't appreciate just how much I preferred other people to the Parisians until I lived among the Parisians. But this is not an original thought, so probably not worth
you're not
really
the first to say that.
Pursue this.
Yeah, and you're not the first American that they might have had, whatever.
Yeah.
You know. So you year and a half there. You're coming back here to do what?
Moving to Berkeley.
Yeah.
Then we were waiting for a house to be ready.
Why Berkeley?
We fell in love with Berkeley. When I was working on the new thing, we went out there to the West Coast in the first place because Stanford had given Tabitha a fellowship, and I got intrigued by Silicon Valley and wrote this book about it. And we had to stay there for me to finish the book. And so we moved from Berkeley. Offered us jobs teaching at kind of a base camp, and we moved up to Berkeley and spent the year there and just fell absolutely in love with the place. America is not good at producing particular places. America is a homogeneity to place in America. There are not many places where you feel like it's so distinctive from any other place you know. Yeah. And Berkeley has that feel to it. It's chock full of interesting people. Yeah. I like how politicized it is. Yeah. I mean, everything is a political issue.
Even today.
Oh, even today.
You think of Berkeley, you first instantly think of the free speech movement, and then Ronald Reagan, and then the rest of it.
But it's a much more complicated place than that. Underneath the free speech movement, there is an old Midwestern town. Yeah. I mean, all these Midwesterners moved out there and created the place. A very kind of basically conservative place. Laid on top of this with this student rebellion, of which there's still a lot of evidence today. Yeah. But on top of that is the detritus of the .com revolution. Yeah. A lot of money, a lot of new money, and there's lots of flashpoints.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? Teach and write and do television?
I don't know if I'll teach, but I will write. Yeah. I mean, it's as good a place as any to find a material.
Is that what you are, a writer?
I think of myself. I mean, if I'm not, then God knows what I am.
No, but I mean, you think of that in a sense. That's what you are. In a sense, you're a guy who writes books about subjects that interest you, primarily within the world of business and the future.
Yeah, well, I would say not. This book teeters dangerously on futurology, but that's not really what I am. What I am is an observer and a chronicler, and I like reporting. I like writing narrative. I'm tempted by narrative fiction as well as nonfiction, that's how I make my living. I do bits and pieces of other things. I made this television show. Right. I do magazine journalism.
We'll talk about that, right? But you fell in love with John McCain doing magazine journalism.
Yeah, well, I'm not original in that way
either.
No,
of course not. No, we just talked about that.
I like to think I fell in love better than anybody else.
Yeah, well, you wrote better than anybody else, that's for sure. And you were confessional about it too.
And I was early to the story.
That's right. Fair enough.
So that's my end of my defense.
This book, tell me about it. The future. Michael Lewis, Arthur New, next thing. The future just happened. What's the future that just happened?
Well, the conceit of the book is that if you look at this thing has landed on the culture, the internet.
Right.
It's been assimilated at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, compared to other technologies like the telephone or the television set, people have picked it up at an extraordinary rate.
Right.
It's become part of people's lives, so it's almost invisible to them now. But if you look at how they're using it, how people are using it, you get a sense of the direction the world wants to go. The premise is that what I always thought was that the internet was misunderstood initially as a potential engine of corporate profits.
I did too.
And it led to this mania in the stock market. Right. But what it really is, I think, is a kind of playing field for status games. I mean, there are all these wonderful little revolts that take place on the internet, and those revolts can often be very revealing. And so what I went and said, what I did with this, what I do with any story, I go looking for little microcosms, stories that tell you, that say more about the world than just the story.
Okay, tell me the stories you've found.
Well, the first thing that really interested me was this young man in rural New Jersey, in Cedar Grove, New Jersey, Jonathan Lebed, 14-year-old boy who is interested in Stone Cold Steve Austin and goes onto the web to build a website to Stone Cold Steve Austin and starts finally kind of browsing financial websites.
Why was he interested in a wrestler?
What 14-year-old boy is not interested in
I don't
no,
have
you're
a
out of
14-year-old
touch.
son. Yeah, right.
You're kind of out of touch,
Yeah.
I think, here. But
They all are? That's what,
it is the thing.
Teenagers drive professional wrestling?
Who do you think puts those books by professional wrestlers on the top of the bestseller list?
Teenagers. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
I thought there were the wrestling fans in Middle America.
Well, I'm sure the teenagers in Middle America, but teenagers are obsessed with it.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It's a big thing.
Now, why is that?
Well, you got me. I mean, I never understood the appeal of the thing in the first place. I'd rather see people really wrestle.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
It just looks like
Or
bad
box, yeah.
theater to me,
Yeah.
but that's an unpopular view.
Well, come on. You must have thought about this. If this is
About why he was so interested in it.
Yeah.
It was a fantasy for him. He thought it was, he could imagine himself doing this. In fact, there's a very funny
He wanted to be Stone
episode,
Cold Austin.
Yeah, a very funny episode in his young life where he went out for the wrestling team in high school and thought that that's what wrestling was. And he went in and pulled some of Stone Cold Steve Austin's moves on the wrestling team, and the coach threw him out of the practice because you don't know that isn't really wrestling. Right. Hitting people over the head with chairs and that kind of
show
thing.
business.
Right. But in any case, he goes on the internet and he becomes obsessed with the stock market and very interested in the stock market because he starts to invest in the stock market. And well, we all read the story in the newspaper when it happened. The SEC.
He ran it up to $800,000.
Yeah, made $800,000, but buying stocks in the morning before he went to school, plastering the internet with messages saying, telling everyone else, buy this stock. Right. The stock inevitably went up, and he turned a few $1,000s into $800,000. And when this story hit, I can remember this story. The news broke on this story about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, and the story was the SEC was for the first time prosecuting a minor for securities fraud.
Right.
But it turned out to be a little more complicated than that. They went after him, but they left him with $550,000 of his profits. They decided that the case wasn't terribly strong. But when I read the story, I remember thinking I didn't understand what this kid had done wrong. And it struck me that what he had done was ape what professional Wall Street people were doing. He had seen that if you turned on CNBC or CNN FN, that
people were promoting stocks?
Coming across the screen promoting either the stocks of their companies or companies they were making public, or the investment bankers promoting stocks, and turns out the Wall Street analysts promoting stocks that they own. He was just doing what everybody else
Whether
was
they're
doing.
promoting or not, everybody had a story to tell.
Everybody had a story to tell. And I didn't understand. I was curious to know more because of that. And I worked my way into his life. He hadn't talked to a reporter, and I went and spent a lot of time with the family. And
You say, I worked my way into his life.
You have to do that.
How do you do that?
Well, his
You just
lawyer.
pay a lot of attention and.
Well, I mean, they were rejected in appeals from other people to come in and see him. But I talked to his lawyer, was the interface, and his lawyer had read Liar's Poker, thought there was a certain sensibility there that might fit this story. The lawyer knew, a very intelligent guy, knew exactly how big and interesting a story this was. Knew that there were layers to it. It wasn't just a financial story. It was a story about a family. It was a story about the way the internet affected people. And he said, "Come on and have a look and see, what you think." And when I met the family, I thought, "Wow! I mean, the story was much richer than young man manipulates stock market and SEC comes down on it." Because what had happened was, in this town of Cedar Grove, this kid had become Warren Buffett. He'd become the guy when he walks out the door and says, "I think that's going up." They all went and bought. Everybody in town went.
Everybody thought he knew something.
Yeah, I knew something. The teachers were buying stocks based on his recommendations. The kids were buying stocks based on his recommendations. And one of the kids said they turned Fifth Period Study Hall into a little Wall Street. He said fifth period Wall Street was study hall was like a little Wall Street because all the computers in the library were given over to the kids trading stocks that Jonathan would recommend.
Why was the SEC so upset with you? Arthur Levitt was on this program and he just blasted you.
He was very upset because I made him look bad. I mean, I think that's the first reason. But what he said, someone told me you got to watch Charlie's show because Arthur Levitt's saying bad things about you. And we said as I sandbagged him and I didn't actually understand this charge because he said I went to go see him on some other pretext and then brought this up, and so that's why he didn't know about it, and then that was a bad thing I had done. But in fact, I'd gone in with the camera crews before I went to go see him to interview one of his underlings about Jonathan Lebed, and it was his underling who said you ought to meet Arthur, and Arthur. So
it wasn't your idea?
No, it wasn't my idea to go see him. It was there. When I was introduced to him, I said I'd love to come talk to you. Never talked about what we were going to talk about, and in fact, a very funny thing happened when I went to go see him. I was sitting in his waiting room. He came out to get me, and he says, "I knew your father on Wall Street." Joe Thomas. And I said, Joe Thomas was my father. He says, no, sure he is. And no, he's not. Joe Thomas was the head of Lehman Brothers, was Michael Thomas's father. He thought I was Michael Thomas.
Is that right?
He was off a generation.
Right. So Michael Thomas is a writer now who lives on Long Island.
He was confused about why I was there, but it was shocking to me. And I really, when I went to go see him,
Michael Lewis, Michael Thomas.
What the hell, right? It's all the same. But I really thought when I went to go see him that he was going to explain to me why I didn't understand this.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
He'd give you an insight that you didn't have.
That I didn't have. That what Wall Street people did that was different from what this kid did. Why it was morally, different. And instead, he was pretty weak on the details of the case, and he'd been on television talking about the case. So that shocked me because he'd been kind of raking the kid over the coals on national television, and what shocked me even more was that no one at the SEC ever bothered to go sit with this kid and find out why he did what he did. But that was the financial scandal side of the story was really, it was only a small part of what interested me.
And what's the most important thing about the story?
There were two things. Can I have two things?
Yes.
All right. One was the way it showed how fragile and vulnerable the social structure is. Kid makes all this money. Everybody finds out he makes this money. He is instantly elevated to the status of adult in the eyes of his teachers, his parents. Inside the household, there's a kind of inversion. The father becomes the son becomes the father. The son has become, through his expertise on the internet, a kind of honorary grown-up. And in fact, the way it had wrong-footed the parents, who really had no notion of what they didn't understand what he was doing on the internet. It was very similar to what happens to an immigrant family. Immigrant family arrives in America, nobody speaks English. The kids learn the language
first.
And all of a sudden the kids are running circles around the parents. Right. This felt just like that. The tone of the household felt like they'd been turned into immigrants. And I thought, how interesting this is, because all across America, in some form, this is happening.
Okay.
Kids are ahead on this in this technology. In a probably more subtle form, the same sort of dynamic is taking place in a lot of families.
So what happens when that power is taken away, when therefore he doesn't have that adult, that adult assimilation model?
You mean when he's no longer allowed to be him? Well, it's a good question.
I mean, he's no longer the kid with any special knowledge about how to make money.
Well, he's never lost that because his status in his town was unaffected by the SEC coming down on him. He was, as far as they're concerned, he was left with $550,000 in profits, and he's still trading. He's on the internet trading now. I mean,
how's he doing?
I think okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he's actually got the. I mean, it made it even more interesting. The kid has the mind of a trader.
Yeah.
I mean, he really is.
You should know.
You've
seen a trader.
I've seen a trader, but he's one of these people who is completely unemotional, faced with a panic, complicated kind of chaotic sort of circumstances. He's able to make judgments.
Now, let me move. I want to talk about general questions now, but just what other microcosm other than the Jonathan Lebed story would you suggest as a microcosm about the impact of what happened?
Well, one thing
teenage power.
Well, it's not just teenage power. It's just the kids are just, they're very good at finding vulnerabilities in the grown-up world. They experiment with this technology, and they do all kinds of weird things. And there's another story.
Because they have a lot of free time.
They have a lot of free time. They're not afraid of anything.
Right.
It doesn't occur to them anybody's going to do anything bad to them if they, whatever they do.
That's right.
You know, I mean, there's no sense of the consequences
That's right.
of their actions.
No sense of downside.
None. Only upside.
Right.
So it's very exciting.
Right.
Another 15-year-old boy in the desert of California goes onto the internet, goes onto one of these knowledge exchange sites called AskMe.com, used by 10 million people last year, to find answers to his biology homework. And he discovers that there's a little place where you can get legal advice. And he turns out he's a court TV obsessive, and has been since he was very young. And he goes on and he sees he can answer the questions. He knows the answers to the questions. So he starts to supply the answers to the questions. And in a matter of weeks, he is a highly ranked legal expert. He lies and says he's not 15. He says he's 25. Highly ranked legal expert by the people who are getting his advice. And he has several hundred clients. And at which point, he puts his phone number on the website. And his family phone's ringing off the hook. And these are people who are in jail who want his help. They're people who are in divorce court who want his help. They love the way he handles their cases. And he, at which point he kind of panics. And he admits to everybody that he's 15 years old. And the world, instead of punishing for it, says that, well, he must be some kind of wizard if he's gotten this far at the age of 15. They want his advice even more. His parents finally drew the line. He was trying to get his mother to drive him around to various courthouses in California where he could march in and kind of play Perry Mason. But this story came to me because I went looking for, I mean, what was inherent in the internet, in the technology, was it gave people information, right?
And it had the quality of anonymity.
And the quality of anonymity. But it clearly undermined anybody whose prestige, authority, power derive from their privileged access to information. Now, this is true of professions.
Yeah, sure.
It's true of lots of things, right? And the degree it undermines it is the degree to which the internet is used, the speed of it, all the rest. So this is a force that's going to gather strength over time. And it just occurred to me, I just asked, we had a team of researchers on this television show. I said, let's go see what's going on in the law. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. Let's go see. And it turned out that, in fact, there are huge numbers of do-it-yourself legal websites. The internet is undermining some part, the pure informational part of the practice of the law.
Yeah.
And people who would have otherwise had to go to lawyers to get answers are using the internet. And this kid kind of fell out of that. But again, it was another case where a 15-year-old boy who wasn't terribly happy with the way the world viewed him when he was in the flesh got on the internet and created another persona, another identity.
Let's talk about general things now. You didn't like, my friend Bill Joy wrote a piece in Wired Magazine, got lots and lots and lots of attention, including on this show. You disagreed with his theory about nanotechnology and about robotics and about anything else that suggested that we were coming to a terrible end.
Well, Bill Joy was also lumped with his friend, Danny Hillis, who, has he been on this show?
Yes, he has.
To talk about the 10,000-year-old clock?
Yeah, exactly, and artificial intelligence and other things.
I'll give you my theory in a nutshell of Bill Joy and Danny Hillis. Question that occurred to me when I got into this was, it was clear to me that that the economy is increasingly premised on really rapid technical change. That economy is very friendly to young people.
Right.
If you want a great example of the effects of really rapid technical change on economic life, Wall Street. Liar's Poker is the story of that in a funny way, because I walked into Wall Street in the mid-1980s when the computer had hit Wall Street, and all of a sudden finance was innovating, and it has been ever since. Stocks and bonds get more and more complicated. 6 months into being there,
Bloomberg built an empire because of this.
Right. I'm a complete know-nothing when I walk onto the trading floor. 6 months later, I know things that are critical to the business that the bosses don't understand, giving me enormous...
Because you understood computers.
Because I was faced with this new complicated thing. I had time on my hands, reason to learn it. so on and so forth, because I was in on the ground floor of
right.
something, and they were busy.
And your point is that you were like a teenager.
I was like a teenager, right? Not just me, but this was the age of of the 24-year-old millionaire on Wall Street, which we've never quite left behind. And the reason for that was it was a constantly changing, innovative environment.
They had access to information technology, and therefore they could find answers that others couldn't.
That's right. They were more comfortable with change.
Where do you end up with respect to what we have just experienced? Do you end up as a friend of the Internet? Do you end up as a believer that the Internet is an instrument and a tool that we can use for huge
I think that the Internet
contributions to society?
Look, I think that the Internet eloquently upgrades the great American machine of creative destruction. What it does is it democratizes and it commercializes lots of things.
Right.
And that is what this culture is good at doing.
Right.
But the Internet has given it a tool to do it in ways it's never done it before.
A velocity.
A velocity. And I think that's a big deal. And I think I just reiterate the point that it is a mistake to think that this technology is just about its importance rises and falls with its ability to generate profits for corporations. That is a subplot in the story of the technology.
I couldn't agree more. If you care about change and all of its manifestations, Michael Lewis has trained his own eye on this one more time in this book, and also in an A&E documentary that will be on when? Do we know?
Monday and Tuesday evening.
This began with the BBC?
BBC commissioned it and then became a co-production with A&E.
Yeah. Oh, it's great to have you.
Well, nice to see you.
Much fun in Berkeley.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.